I would like to introduce our guest today. Rabbi Elliot Baskin is a spiritual leader and Jewish globetrotter in Denver who helps build meaning through learning, counseling, and ritual, both in the land of elk and honey, and volunteering for the holidays internationally in such places as Taiwan, Guatemala, Myanmar, Bali, and most recently, Suriname. We can't wait to hear about his adventures and travels coming up later in the year. Please welcome Rabbi Baskin as we explore Jewish geography in Oppa. It's great to meet.
Thank you, Rebecca, and wonderful Kavod staff, Jody, for this opportunity to share with all of you. First of all, just a healthcare concern. Would it be okay for me to wear my mask or not wear my mask? But do you notice, what are the colors of this mask? They are kahol v'lavan, blue and white, which are also the colors of the Greek flag. So I am excited to share with you today some of the history, some of the stories, some of the legends about the oldest Jewish community in the Western Hemisphere. But before we go there, I want to see through a show of hands. And by the way, I would love it if you can take yourself off, put yourself on camera, and I'll make a deal with you. I'll be on camera if you're on camera. It just makes it easier to see the faces and get the reactions. I mean, if there is an extreme reason, of course, I respect your privacy, but it's just nice to see your punams. So by a show of hands, how many people have been to Greece? Okay, so I see 1, 2, 3, okay, about half. Have anyone been to Cyprus? Raise your hands. Okay. Has anyone been to Astoria in Queens? Raise your hands. Okay, that's good. And has anyone of you been to Toronto? Raise your hands. Toronto being one of the largest Greek communities outside of Athens, second only to Astoria in Queens in New York. And so we have a lot of Greek experiences. When I think of Greece and when you think of Greece, what are some of the associations that come to mind? Feel free to put them in the chat. I think of things like delicious wines coming from Greece. I also think of yummy things like Greek olives. And I think of delicious foods like baklava. And how many people, by show of hands, received the baklava and the kalamata olives through an Amazon package at your doorstep before today? Well, we'll try and make sure that you get it before the next time. That was just in my dreams. But
However,
wonderful.
I will add that they did receive it via text, via email. They got recipes for baklava and olives. So take a look at your emails.
And Len said, oh, the New York diners. And what is your favorite Greek restaurant in Denver?
Yanni's.
Yanni's, okay, absolutely. Good one here in the Denver Tech Center. And downtown Greektown. Has anyone ever been there on Colfax Avenue, not too far from East High School? And I believe was it called Pete's or a wonderful Greek diner. So there used to be more, but I've always been fascinated by Greeks and Greek history, going all the way back to Hanukkah. So let me, Jero's Place. Okay, sounds good, Debbie. Any other Greek food recommendations?
Phoenician kebab or Phoenician grill on Colfax and Monaco.
Okay, good, yes. And it's interesting because there are a lot of places. We think of Greek food, we think of Greek heritage, and so much of, oh, the Monaco Inn, yes. And what I love there, I love their lemon rice soup, which is the traditional Greek soup, which is magnificent. And let's see, any other recommendations or anything? Jiro's Place, New York Diners, music and dance, Jiro's, absolutely. Okay, so let me share about my Greek Odyssey. And so many of the words that we use, like the word Odyssey, go back to Greek mythology and Greek tradition. And this is why I've always been fascinated by Greek ever since when I was in junior high and I took a semester of Greek and fell in love with the language, with the people, with the mythology, with the history, and later as an adult with the Jewish intersection of all of this. So let's go in and I will show you where we are.
Yep. Looks good.
Looks good. Okay. So this is, as I like to tease, this is the AEGEAN highlights with a Rhodes Scholar for Kavod on the Road on today, which is 7/11, a very special day. So how did we even come with this whole idea? Well, this came back to my international volunteering. And my passion in my semi-retirement is serving Jewish communities around the world. As Rebecca told you at the beginning, I had the privilege of serving the High Holy Days in Taiwan, in Myanmar, in Bali, in Guatemala, and last year in Suriname. But during COVID, a lot of the international travel shut down. And so I decided I wanted to go and to seize the day, or carpe diem, by spending the High Holy Days in the AEGEAN. And this was able to be done because we were all tested before we got on the ship, when we got on the ship each week. So we were COVID safe and we were in a wonderful bubble. And I got to explore the wonders of the AEGEAN. The beautiful woman to the right is my beloved Hillary. She, of course, is an orthodontist, and we do brachas and braces, or Torah and teeth, or shul and drool. And there we are on the Seabourn Ovation, and I am leading High Holy Day services, blowing the shofar at the end of Ne'ilah off the coast of Santorini in the beautiful Aegean Ocean. So when we talked about before, what does it mean to experience the Greek passion for life, or the joie de vivre, to make a metaphor? We think about, and you could show of hands, how many people remember the great musical Zorba the Greek in 1964? Or if you look to the right, some of those, again, the delicious olives and the feta cheese on a Greek salad, which still remains one of my favorite luncheon delights. Of course, Greek wine, particularly the white wines, are just delicious. And for a little l'chaim, or opa, as they say, ouzo, which made its way to Israel as Iraq and made its way to our culture as the delicious beverage of anise, or of licorice. And of course, the passion for life evidenced by Greek architecture in the Parthenon, which is perhaps one of the greatest buildings ever built with such classical structure. If you want to put any of your favorite associations of the Greek passion for life in the chat, absolutely, this would be a great time, and Rebecca can share them. So When I think about Greece, I think about all sorts of beautiful things. Look at this nighttime scene on the left of a Cretan harbor. Crete being one of the major islands along with Rhodes, where we'll be going today virtually. And then over on the right, the Temple of Poseidon. Such beauty. And then the Greek love of life, hedonism, which is literally the word, the life of pleasure. And you'll see all these wonderful people at the beach, and you'll hear in the summers of the all-night disco parties on places like MYKONOS, and the passion for having a wonderful time. And then on the right, the beauty of Santorini, with the blue and the white echoed all over. How gorgeous, and people having a wonderful time.
I don't know how to use.
Pardon? Okay. So when I think, though, about Greece, I think about the history. And Greek civilization goes back 3 millennia, maybe even 4 millennia, which is just quite incredible. 4,000 years, when the Greek traders were trading all around the Mediterranean, which was essentially a Greek lake, so to speak. And you'll see some of the vestiges of this with the pottery from things as far away as Spain on the west, all the way almost to the Indus Valley in India on the east, down to Egypt on the south, and everywhere in between. And this is the history and the intersection of Greek culture with Mediterranean culture, which of course is going to be part of Jewish culture, as we're there too. So we go back to Greece at the beginning of the diaspora. And what many people don't realize is that so many of the words that we use are actually Greek words. Diaspora, or the word synagogue, synagoga, literally the coming together of people. And our first exile was 2,500 years ago when we went to Babylon. And it was known as the diaspora, as the Jewish dispersion. But after the exile, Jews settled in Mesopotamia and in Egypt and in Greek cities, the polis, or the Greek city-state. It's interesting, the word polis means a city, and we find that in words as Minneapolis, Indianapolis, Annapolis. So many of even the words that we use. And we go back, there's references in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew scriptures, to the word Greeks, Yavan, going all the way back, and especially in the stories around Hanukkah, where it all comes in. And that is first found in the Maccabees. What many people don't realize is that the Maccabees are not, and the story of Hanukkah is not written in the Torah. It is not written in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew scriptures. Rather, it's found in the Apocrypha, which is a Greek word meaning the hidden writings. And today you'll find it not in a Jewish Tanakh, but in a Catholic study Bible, which has the Hebrew scriptures, the Christian scriptures, and then it has the these stories that didn't make it into Jewish traditional scriptures, but it made it into these hidden works. And there is the first, second, third, and fourth Maccabees. And in it, we find this reference of Antiochus, the son of King Demetrius, addressed a letter from the Mediterranean Isles to Simon the priest and the ethnarch, or the chief ruler of the Jews, and to the whole nation. And this letter was sent to such places as DELOS, Rhodes, Crete, and Cyprus in the ancient world. So this is the earliest reference to some of these Jewish places that we're going to be visiting as we go along. One of the ways that we find out about this is not just from the Apocrypha, but from the Christian scriptures, which mentions Jewish communities. Because there was this great Jewish missionizer, his name was Saul, who was later converted to Christianity under the name of Paul. And when he went around the world in the Mediterranean, he spoke to Jewish communities. And that's how we know that Jewish life existed there and that they had communities. Here you see some of the great Jewish pilgrimage sites, such as Patmos, where according to Christian tradition, some of the great works of Revelations were written by St. John according to Christian tradition. Or on the right, the pillar of Paul, where he was flogged according to Christian tradition. And these are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Why are they important? Because through the letters of Paul and the journeys that he went on, we get to see Jewish communities. So every place you see a triangle, that was a Jewish community. Now, the areas which were more predominantly Jewish were the areas in pink and in deep pink or orange. And so you'll see as we go along, at the bottom right-hand corner, we're going to talk about Rhodes. Further, the right-hand corner, Cyprus. In the middle bottom, you'll see Crete. And in the top, you'll see Athens. And at the very top, you'll see Salonika, which was a great Jewish center. So this gives you sort of a map, and all these places are mentioned in the Christian scriptures as Paul's efforts to convert the Jews. So if he was going to be converting the Jews, it must have been there were Jews there and significant Jewish communities. So let's start off in Athens, which is one of my favorite places in the world because of its history. And the Jewish community there was really an original community. Frequently, people talk about the Ashkenazi Jews and the Sephardic Jews, Ashkenazi being the Jews of Eastern Europe, of Poland and Russia and Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And then they talk about the Sephardic Jews from the Hebrew word Sepharad, meaning Spain, the Jews of Spain and Portugal, and then the Jews that went to Amsterdam, and then the Jews who went to Italy and to Turkey and to Greece, following the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, which we are going to be actually commemorating in the next couple of weeks with Tisha B'Av, the Jewish Friday the 13th holiday. And we are now in the 3 weeks of mourning leading up to this. So we think about the Sephardic Jews. However, before the Inquisition, way back over 2 millennia ago, were the Jewish community in Athens. And they go by the term Romaniot Jews because they predated Ashkenazi and Sephardic. There are 2 beautiful synagogues found very close to the Agora, the marketplace. The one on the right is called Eitz Chaim, built in the early 1900s with sort of an Egyptian classical style. And the one on the left called Beth Shalom, And I love how you can see in the Greek, it'll say Beth Shalom Synagogue or synagogue because it's Greek. And this community goes all the way back. There's about 5,000 Jews now living in Greece. There once were many more before the Holocaust, and we'll be talking about some of that, especially when we talk about the Jews of Rhodes going forward. And it's a community that has a wonderful rabbi. In fact, when we were there, it was a Friday night, we went to services, and frequently there's a lot of security. So when you go to any Jewish place overseas, it's important to know that to carry your passport with you, if possible, to email the community before with a copy of your passport. And then you'll meet Israeli security people outside. And the way I usually get in, I'll speak to them in Hebrew. I'll say, Shalom Aleichem, Anachnu mi Artzot Habrit, we're from the States, and Anachnu rotzim lehitpalel ima Yehudim b'batei Knesset. And we would like to worship tonight for Shabbat with the Jews in these beautiful synagogues. And then they'll usually say, of course, come on in. We went in, we were greeted so warmly. And that's the beauty, I think, about the Mediterranean heritage, because Greeks, Italians, Jews, we're all Mediterranean, and we hug one another. We have that joy of life, and we have that cardinal Jewish value of haknasat orchim, or the welcoming of the stranger. So we went in, we enjoyed, people talked to us, and we learned about the community and the challenge and how many new people are now coming into the community as Greece is becoming more and more important in the economic European community. But the challenges of getting a good rabbi, and a rabbi who knows both Greek and is sensitive to the culture and the customs that go back for 2 millennia. In Athens is a fabulous Jewish museum, which I highly recommend. And by going there, you get to see what the heritage of Greece was like from all over. And sadly, with the exception of Athens and the tiny community in Rhodes, the museum is really all that's left because of the brutality of the Nazis during the Second World War. But they are so proud of their history. And you can even do a virtual tour of Greece through the Jewish Museum. So one of our first stops was in Crete. And they have a beautiful place in Chania, which is the old capital. And you can see the synagogue was a 15th century synagogue, which means it's over 500, almost 600 years old. It was a church that was then adapted and is absolutely beautiful. Eitz Chaim means literally the tree of life, and it's found in the old town of this beautiful harbor. With all sorts of Venetian architecture, because people from Venice were very big coming through. And you see the confluence of many different cultures throughout Greece. The entrance to the synagogue has that classical Greek architecture as you go in. And when you go in, you see a beautiful Aron Kodesh, a beautiful ark, which some of the Sephardic refer to as the Heichal, literally as the palace where the Sefer Torah is kept, the beautiful wooden design. And in the courtyard is the cemetery. I love going to cemeteries because you can see so much about the history and the culture of civilization by observing what happens there. You'll notice these graves are built up high. Now, why do you think that would be? As opposed to if you go into our cemeteries here in Denver, everything's in the ground. But here, the cemetery and the matzevot, the monuments are raised, and that's because this is in a port with a very high water table. So in places like in Greece and in places like in New Orleans or any other place close to the ocean, frequently you'll see the cemeteries raised up. To the left, you see a mikveh that the Jewish community used. There's my beloved wife pointing out the mikveh. And on the right, you'll see this was an endangered monument, one of over 100 places most endangered. And the World Monuments Watch organization, an organization started by an influence with many Jews, said, this is a place we have to save. So they came in and they restored this synagogue, which is absolutely gorgeous. I asked about services, and they said sometimes they'll try and fly in a rabbi for the holidays, but very few people. The Jewish community is not active, but there is nostalgia, and so many tourists come, and that's the way that brings life, with tours going to the synagogue. Outside of MYKONOS is another synagogue in the place called DELOS. Now, DELOS was the capital of the Delian League. And this was places like Athens to the west, to all the Cyclades islands in the middle. And DELOS was the Manhattan of the ancient world. People would come and they would trade, but they had an interesting rule. No one could be born on the island and no one could die on the island. But they would have commerce there. And if you go back, you'll see the ruins of perhaps one of the oldest synagogues outside of the land of Israel, going back 2,200 years or so. And many people do go to MYKONOS because it's a wonderful party place, but you have to take a special boat to get to DELOS, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And wherever you go, the place that was significant, there's always a synagogue. Then my favorite place is RHODES. And that's why I talked about, of course, this is kavod on the road, but for today, I'm going to talk about it as kavod on the roads, because after all, I am a Rhodes scholar for today. And it's one of the most charming islands that you can go to. And when your ship comes into the harbor, you go inside the beautiful walls, and there's signs all over saying to the synagogue and to the museum, both in Greek and in Hebrew. And it is absolutely gorgeous. This was a place of culture, of civilization, of wealth, and an extensive Jewish community. And there's even a story here to America. First of all, at one part of the island, look at this incredible Acropolis. Literally, the polis, the city on the Accra, on the mountain, overlooking, spectacular. And the harbor where the ships coming, you see the walls, you see the fortresses, and this is a place where the Crusaders came and built this up and used this as a port on the way to the Holy Land for the Crusades to liberate Jerusalem from the infidels, in quotations, from the Muslims. So it was really the crossroads of the ancient world. What's interesting is that there was a Colossus in the 2nd century before the Common Era, this huge bronze statue that was huge, that was literally with the legs on each side of the harbor, and you could see the ships coming in. And it was one of the wonders of the ancient world, the Colossus. Now, there is an interesting American connection to this. And that is, this was the inspiration for Emma Lazarus, the great Jewish poet, who wrote a poem found at the base of the Statue of Liberty. And I quote from her famous poem: "Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles, from her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air bridge harbor that twin cities frame. Keep ancient lands your storied pomp," cries she. "With silent lips, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuge of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." So there, from the harbor and the Colossus 2,200 years ago to the Statue of Liberty is a connection, and the connection cemented by a Jewish poet, Emma Lazarus. So when you go into Rhodes, you see La Juderia, literally the Jewish quarter. This wasn't a ghetto, but this is where the Jews lived. In fact, at one time, a quarter of the population of Rhodes was Jewish. Maybe there were 500, later there were close to 2,000 Jews, and Jews were very influential. You'll see the beauty of it in these twisted, narrow alleyways. And now a lot of it's in ruin, but still you can find remnants of what it was. If you'll see the black and the white murals and the mosaics, this was the sign of the Rhodes Jewish quarter that you went through. Today, there's not a lot you can see, but there are some mosaics, and there's hints as you walk along. At one time, there was a rabbinical college for the Jews that were there, because they had 4 synagogues. A rabbinical college where they taught in Hebrew, they taught in Ladino, which is sort of the Sephardic Yiddish, or what German is to Yiddish, Spanish with some Greek and Turkish and other words is to Ladino. And this was the rabbinical college. And as you go along in the Juderia, you can see signs on the right to another synagogue, and to the left, as you go along, on the right part of the doorposts going in, seen with these old buildings, frequently you'll see a divot for where a mezuzah was many years or centuries ago, before they were taken down or they just fell off. Inside is the Juderia is the oldest synagogue in Greece, going back about 500 years. And this is the oldest continuously in use synagogue. It's called Kahal Shalom, literally the community of peace. And going inside, it's absolutely a fascinating and beautiful place, which still has people. Here is the central bima with beautiful menorot, mosaics, and wood. And the bima is in the middle, and the community in the Sephardic tradition surrounds it. You'll see on the right that there are 2 arcs with old, beautiful Torahs, and the Torahs are in the little teaks, the round Torah scrolls, wooden Torah scrolls to hold them, which is typical of Sephardic tradition. Now, when we went, I had written ahead, and I said, I'll be coming on the 2nd day of Rosh Hashanah, And would I be able to come with people from the cruise? So they were all excited because they wanted to make sure there was a minyan. When I came in, I and Hillary were number 8 and 9. And finally, someone came in from the cruise, so we had a minyan, and they were all excited. And after the services, they invited us for the Rosh Hashanah, the Kiddush luncheon. And we found out that the rabbi was originally from San Francisco, and he went to yeshiva in Denver, Colorado, at Beit Yaakov on the west side before going to Israel. And every year they bring them in. And the Rhodes tradition is a different tradition. It has their own machzor, their own prayer books. And the Jews of Rhodes then went all over the world, to the Congo, to Zimbabwe, which also used to be called Rhodesia, to Seattle. And they have a very powerful Rhodes or Rhodesi diaspora, which tries to come back each year for a reunion in the summer. And we were amazed by the warmth of the community, the history, and the gorgeousness. You'll see the ladies' gallery up above, the mikveh. They have a beautiful Jewish museum here. And it was a great community up until July of 1944. And this is in the Martyrs Square. And the sadness that right towards the end of the war, the Germans had taken the entire Jewish community to concentration camps. But Rhodes was at the very end, within seeing distance of Turkey. And yet, in July of 1944, right near the end of the war, the German troops came in and they rounded up all of the Jews. About 2,000 Jews were rounded up from the island of Rhodes and the sister island of Kos. And it was taken on a 9-day boat trip going to Piraeus, which is the port of Athens. And then once they were in Athens, 13 days by cattle car going to Auschwitz. And then the Jewish community was exterminated, brutally murdered. After the war, out of the approximately 2,000 Jews of Rhodes that went to the gas camps, the concentration camps, only 150 survived. And they didn't return to Rhodes, but they did survive to tell the story. Sadly, none of them came back, but this monument remains in the Juderia of the tradition, and it's in English, it's in Ladino, it's in Greek, and it's in Hebrew, telling the story of the Jews of Rhodes and the very last part of them. In 1956, a few Jews, 25 Jews, came back from the mainland to rejuvenate the Jewish community of Rhodes. And there is a very small but very dedicated Jewish community that is still there. Now, I want to tell you a Holocaust story for those of you who remember these beautiful COVID masks and why we're even on Zoom because of COVID. And remember the scariness, particularly to people of our age, post 65, and people whose bodies were compromised. And what made the difference in the post-COVID world? Well, it was the vaccine. And what was the #1 company to start the vaccine? And that was Pfizer. And Pfizer was actually headed up by a Jew, Albert Bourla. His family came from Salonika, which was the original name called today of Thessalonica. And he was so grateful that during the war, his parents escaped to Israel. And in appreciation of that, and the fact that Israel took in all the Jewish refugees from Greece and so many other parts of the world and of Europe, that he said, you know something, I'm going to give the Pfizer vaccine to Israel first. They were the first country in the world to have it. After that, it was the United States and other Western countries, but it all comes from a Jew. And he said, only in America, someone from humble beginnings like me, from a small country with a heavy accent, would make it to the top of one of the major multinational corporations in the world. So he started off as a veterinarian, going to the veterinary school in Salonika, and then made it to America and became the head of Pfizer. And so look at this with Hanukkah time. Here he is lighting the Chanukiah, a proud Jew of Greek origin, whose legacy and leadership from Pfizer, at least for me, and I'm sure for all of you with the vaccine, gave us a chance to l'chaim, to live during the time of pandemic. So you'll see Jewish symbols wherever you go, and that's part of the legacy of life. Here is the Benaki Museum, a gorgeous little museum in a beautiful mansion in Athens. And you'll see on the right is a beautiful treasure chest with a Magen David. And look at these shields, which also have Magen Davids. But it's really not that extraordinary because of the Jewish influence going back over 2 millennia. Now, something else interesting in Knossos in Crete. You've heard the story of the Minotaur and the labyrinth. We have a labyrinth in our home, that beautiful maze. But look at this, right in the middle of the Knossos Palace, which goes back about 4,000 years. To give you an idea, Jewish history, the time of the ancient temple, the Temple of Solomon goes back about 3,000 years. And the central point of the temple was the altar from which sacrifices or korbanot were offered up. The altar had horns on it. And the Greek or the Cretan altar also has horns. So what is the influence going back and forth? Clearly, and the horns are the ones of the bull of the Minotaur, of the myth of the labyrinth, and the offerings, the bullock offerings in the ancient temple. So you see the going back and forth of different traditions. It's hard to tell which was first, but clearly Greek tradition influenced Judaism, and Judaism influenced Greek tradition. And even the story, for example, people think that the tribe of Dan may have come from part of the Greek Empire. And the story of Samson is really similar to the story even of Hercules. So it's that coming back and forth that I find so interesting. Look at this. This is in Paphos in Cyprus. You'll see Magen Davids. You'll also see a swastika. Now, as we know, a swastika is a Hindu good luck symbol going back, millennia, and has nothing to do with the Nazis. But the interesting part of the Magen David and the swastika in the beautiful mosaics in some of the ancient historical sites. You'll see the influence of pomegranates. And pomegranates are really big in Jewish tradition, especially for the high holy days, because according to Jewish tradition, there are 613 seeds in a pomegranate, representing the 613 mitzvot, or sacred deeds of connection. And the pomegranates grow there, and they were for sale. And there are lots of Israelis there. So this was interesting because this is in one of the ports, and there is a sign saying, Bruchim Habaim La Blue Laguna, to the Blue Laguna. in Crete. And at the gift shops, you'll see more designs inside and in English and in Greek, which says, ask for help, do not touch, please. And then at the bottom, bevakasha lo lagad, toda rabbah, do not touch in Hebrew. There's only one reason when you see a lot of signs in Hebrew, it means that there are tons of Israeli tourists that come. And it's an hour flight from Israel, so why not? So that's there are a lot of Israelis galore. Cyprus, look at this beautiful Jewish community center. And I found it so intriguing because this is one of the divided capitals of the world. You'll see on the right that this is the border between Greek Cyprus and Turkish Cyprus. And in the 1970s, the Turks invaded, and it's become a divided capital. And the United Nations separates the two. But what's so intriguing is no one talks about the divided capital and the Turkish occupation of the island of Cyprus. It's maybe because it's the backwaters, but it's only an hour away from Israel. And when Israel was a divided capital, there was all sorts of, we heard about it every day. We still do, the controversies of what's going on, but no one's talking about the Turkish occupation. Here you'll see your wall cannot divide us, symbols of the United Nations. Here I am in the background. You can see the Turkish flag, and I'm taking pictures illegally. People said, do not take any more pictures. And when I think about, there's Ben and Jerry's, and there is a sign which says, remember Cyprus. Think about Cyprus, think about the oppression of the Turkish people dividing the land, but no one talks about it. There was the famous Ben and Jerry's incident where they pulled out of the West Bank and everyone made a big deal, but no one talks about Ben and Jerry's, which is in Nicosia, the divided capital. So I've talked. This is a chance for some questions now. I did want to, if you want to take a picture of my contact information, I do have a travel website for High Seas Travel. My email is cyberrebbe@gmail.com if you ever have a question. And let's have some questions now for the next 10 minutes.
I was just going to ask a question about the different languages that the Jews spoke in Greece over the years. So before the Sephardics came, you said there was Romaniot. And were they just,
yes,
were they speaking the language of everyone else, or did they have their own language?
Great question. So us Jews, we speak a number of languages. Just like here, everyone here is wonderful and fluent in English, but many of us here will know some Hebrew when we go to synagogue. And even if we maybe don't know every word, we can follow along. But then there's also another language, and that's what's so intriguing. And that is a type of a little bit of Greek, a little bit of Hebrew, a little bit of other words mushed in. And that's Romaniot, or literally Jewish Greek. The same thing in Italy, there's that Jewish Italian dialect, Romaniot, and they have certain words which may be Hebrew, but then they have it, they're adapted. So it's a little bit like Yiddish, but that was one of the languages that they spoke. And then later, when the Jews came after the Inquisition, that language of Ladino. But again, Ladino, the Ladino in Rhodes is different than the Ladino of Turkey or the Ladino of Athens or Crete or the Ladino of Spain or Portugal. And that's why if you're a linguist, it is absolutely fascinating. And there are some of these Jewish language projects that are trying to resurrect and catalog the languages. That's Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati has a language project, and you can Google it. So that's what I find is absolutely fascinating. What are some of the local words? And us Jews, we are multilingual. So today, when you go in the Juderia of Rhodes, of course, the Jews speak Greek. They are fluent in English. They know French. They know, they're not big on Yiddish, but they do know Ladino and Spanish. And that's just part of being Jewish, being multilingual.
But do you think in today's, in the Greek Jewish population today, a married couple in their 30s with 2 kids who are 10 years old, are they speaking Greek primarily at home, you think?
Definitely Greek. Okay. Absolutely Greek. Because they're assimilated. They'll be able to read Hebrew, but then there'll be a few words that sort of sneak into the vocabulary that are of Hebrew or Ladino origin. In the same way, here in America, you know, if you talk about words like schlep and chutzpah, people know this. Even words like tushy comes from tuchas, comes from tachat, comes from literally bottom. And it's part of the American vocabulary. But yes, they speak Greek, number one, but some of their parents or grandparents may have a few words that they speak. In the same way, my kids know a few abyssal Yiddish, just a few words, but they're by no means fluent. And sometimes they don't even realize that they're using a Yiddish word.
It's funny because when I was in Israel, this is going back over 30 years ago, and I speak Spanish real well from school, real well. And sometimes I'd be lost and I'd ask some old person for help, and they didn't speak any English, I didn't speak any Hebrew, but we were able to speak Spanish to each other through the Ladino.
Yeah. And I love Ladino, which is just such a beautiful language. And sometimes you will see some echoes of it at the Hebrew Educational Alliance. The Ein Kelohenu at the end of services is done in Ladino, which I love. So that's some of the echoes that come in, but unfortunately, it's a dying language the same way Yiddish is, although some people just love studying it and learning it and trying to preserve it. But it's indeed challenging. And if you like traveling, one of the books I love is The Jewish Traveler from Hadassah, which is a great site. They also have a wonderful website from Hadassah magazine, The Jewish Traveler. So if you're going to go or you want to explore, they have all the articles archived. And I make use of that before I go on my traveling adventures.
So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Again, a thank you to JFS for hosting our program today. And again, to you, Rabbi Baskin, it was a delight to have you. Thank you all, and we'll see you soon.